Very much so. In fact, I think it could be easily said that it's one of the greatest acts of self-love is just really to give yourself that time and to have an expectation or to place an expectation on what you're going to get out of it. Is how it does differ than necessarily calling it like an exercise or a physical exercise. Is that people talk about spiritual disciplines, and they say, well, I'm going to become a vegetarian. I'm going to look at all the facades of a spiritual person and say, well, once I do that, then I'll get there. But that works for that person. You can structure your life to live like the Buddha, but that was his venue to get there. And I think things like chanting, in terms of like the Om or Hamsa or many of the other kind of auditory mantras, or listening to Tuvan throat singing or someone playing the didgeridoo, these are peaceful acts. And I think, there could be a person that, blares death metal and just kind of finds this place of serenity. I mean, and that just works for them. And they may not describe it as meditation, but you even think about someone who is in the flow. They talk. They're spitting hip hop, and they're physically speaking. They're physically interacting with people, but they lose themselves as if speaking in tongues, or something of that nature. That there are these spiritual elements to activities that really do reward them and allow them to, even though they're utilizing their mind, in another sense, they're finding that tranquility, that serenity, that oneness, and feeling part of the flow or connection with all of existence. Art, that's why it's art therapy or music therapy. There's so many. I think that at the end of the day, it's therapeutic to meditate, and it is an act of self-love. But the way that you get there, well, that is subject to what really resonates for you and what gets you into that place of just essentially feeling at peace.
I guess in your framework of meditation and the way that the value that you get out of it, do you feel in any way it's your connection to something bigger? I don't want to place it in the same vein as a religious person praying, but do you feel it's your channel or some version of a channel to connect to the divine, a core, some intrinsic truth that holds all mathematical values, aesthetic values, and beauties? Do you feel it's a channel to that for you, or do you see meditation as something different for yourself?
The approach I take on it isn't something that was pre-prescribed. It's more of a feeling of connectivity with all things. I personally feel that there is a barrier to a lot of people because they're taking an Eastern approach for a Western lifestyle. So this is, it's actually like a substantially different venue, because in a lot of the Eastern work, they say, well, a no mind or a quiet mind, or, forcing this vision, envision nothingness until you become the nothingness. Now, I think for someone that lives in a house with 8 other people and is never alone and is living in, downtown Mumbai, the notion of nothingness is kind of a refuge from, the human experience, no matter what your caste is or where you find yourself in life. But someone in the West, and I can only speak for myself really in this way, but this is really how I see it, is that, having had my own room, having had my own, place of alone time and space and this sort of thing, for me, I envision everything. I feel a connection with everything. And the more I surrender to it, I find maybe that nothingness through the surrendering to the feeling of feeling like everything or being connected with it. And so, I think there's a different maybe venue for us individualists out there than the collectivists of the Eastern world or maybe, other countries. So I want to, encourage people to not necessarily only seek the Eastern approach to meditation, but maybe own it themselves and see exactly what resonates the best with them. And to me, it is that everything, although it doesn't, in my experience, feel like something personified per se, or I'm having like a dialogue with an entity, overall, it's a feeling of surrender to existence. And, whether it's the feeling of that, drop of water entering into the ocean, I do lose myself or the confines of myself or the boundaries of myself, which just feel amazing because I'm letting go of my narrative, I'm letting go of my story, and just simply being and simply feeling as if I'm part of this, which is just it's ecstatic, which literally means to feel outside of oneself.
I think that brings in the notion that we talk about often is a sense of gratitude. I often come out of meditation with just an extreme sense of gratitude for life in general. Um, it's it's an unforced sense of gratitude. It's not even a conscious decision. It's just a feeling of acceptance of everything and everyone after a process like that. And I think um, any way that we can continue to incorporate that feeling of extreme gratitude and bliss for life is a good thing. So if meditation is one of those things that can kind of get you there, I definitely see it as a positive that people should look to somehow incorporate in their life. And like you said, not necessarily incorporate it in the sense that they need to adhere to an idea of meditation based off of the Eastern philosophy, but start to look at it as where does meditation possibly already exist in their daily lives that they're not really even aware that it is existing. Like you said, whether it's chopping wood in the forest or these moments that we already have, it's becoming more aware that that situation is meditative. And that in self is bringing awareness to what you're doing.
Well, in fact, it in the West, I think it's actually become so immersed in certain circles, let's say, where meditation is accepted, that you actually have kind of like meditation activism. It's called Med Mob. There's actually, you can look them up, type in meditation mob. So it's groups of people that collect in certain places. This is all over the country, and they meditate and together. And you don't. There's no prescribed way of doing it. You just sit there and kind of do your thing. I've passed by a couple, and it just felt great to be around a bunch of people, kind of sharing this practice together, regardless of what each individual was doing. But I think it goes back. I don't have the details in front of me, but I remember this story about I think it was like 1,000 people or 500 people all met in Washington D.C., which at the time was the highest crime rate, had the highest crime rate in America, which is kind of on the higher end of the violent spectrum. And apparently, for these hours or this day that these people were meditating, the crime rate was just stricken out. Like, it was just a phenomenal day. There was no murders in like the murder capital of America, and I'm not sure if that these people meditating in this city were what created the circumstances for this zero murder day or the lowest murder day in that year to happen. But is it making an effect in a bigger spectrum? Is it affecting other people? If 500, 1,000 people all attain a trance in one place, does it actually change the vibration? Does it create a weather front around them to actually change people's behavior? And the question is if we were all meditating, or is our presence, is that meditation, even by meditating by someone, which I consider myself a bit of a rebel in that sense. I like to be on trains, planes, and buses and commit to my meditation. And I mean, I don't really know how I'm affecting anything, but I mean, it surely feels good to me. But I did it under the impression that maybe just on a very subtle level, maybe I'm just shifting, the overall ambient, the kind of resonant energy of things. That, or everyone just thinks I'm a total freak for rocking my head from side to side. But I'm willing to accept that.
Well, I don't think we necessarily need to take a look at the numbers of a crime rate going down to say whether it's affecting us on a vibrational whole. If that ends up being the result, that's amazing. But I think just alone, if you feel better individually coming out of meditation, and because of it in your life, you're going to inherently affect the rest of people in that you're surrounded with in a more positive light, which in turn will affect the whole. So regardless of whether these 500 people got together and directly affected the outcome of something, which we can't necessarily scientifically prove, I bet you those 500 people, though, that coming out of that meditation felt really good about themselves, and the people around them in their daily lives felt better about themselves because of that. That kind of very contagious attitude. It has been scientifically proven on the like with kindness, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point in a later episode, but they've measured the brainwaves of somebody that is performing an act of kindness, and they watch the certain spikes that are going on in their brain and the certain levels of serotonin released, and then they measure somebody else that's just viewing the act of kindness, and that person that's viewing the act of kindness has the same exact spikes as the person that is performing the act of kindness. So we're kind of getting to this level and this degree of, if you're just kind of being the best version of yourself, you're inherently affecting everybody else around you in a positive way. So if that's not a reason to incorporate, meditation on a daily practice, I'm not sure, what else would be.
Couldn't agree with you more. And again, it's an act of self-love at its core. When you take it away from the notion of a discipline that is something that you must sit there for 25 minutes and do, but rather, I think it could even be something as simple as just sending waves of love to people that you care about, or feeling compassion for people that are hurt, or focusing on gratefulness. It doesn't even have to be something as specific as we were talking about before, mantras, but it can just be really whatever you want it to be that gets you to that place of feeling better than you had before you sat down. And I think you can create social change by making a commitment to just any act of self-love. Just by be the change you want to see.
That's a great place to leave it and head into the final segment of What Did I Learn? After all that we discussed, I can't help but place meditation in the terms that we defined it as, the ultimate form of self-love, as Brett mentioned. In a day and age where society is looking for the cure-all pill, the diet that works the best, or a get-rich-quick scheme, the answer has been around since the dawn of time: meditation. Not necessarily in the form of a Buddhist monk that sits on the hillside contemplating existence, or an over-energized youth pitching you the release felt from their vinyasa yoga lesson, but rather anything that resonates with you internally, where the mind no longer becomes engaged in worries and stresses of your day, but instead focuses on the day itself, in all its beauty, grandeur, and existence. A form of celebrating life, a way of saying thank you, giving you a form to express that gratitude by taking a moment to become aware of all that's around you. For when you explore this method of appreciation, you lower your guard to the world, and what happens as you exit is you open yourself up to a newfound sense of connection and experience with life. And it's with that new connection that you develop deeper bonds, stronger relationships, ultimately forging a better daily you. To enjoy more content from The Spoken You, download our podcast from iTunes or Stitcher. Write to us on thedailyu.org, or follow the discussion on Twitter at @thedailyU, or like us on Facebook. As always, join us here every Monday where we challenge the status quo and engage our brains for something beyond the screen. This is The Spoken You with Jeff and Brett, signing off.